It looks like we have about 1 minute. Thank you for the offer. I appreciate it. So I tend to move around a lot. So you're going to see me bounce back and forth a little bit as I remind myself that the microphone is right here. I think we have a couple people deciding whether they should stay or whether they should go. But we're right at 10:15. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. My name is McDonald. I am currently over at Founders Classical Academy of Corinth. Yay! Yay! And I will be talking about order and obedience today. Because these are things that we generally think about in the classroom is when is the right time for order and when is the right time for obedience. You know, it's interesting, I used to have a job working with animals. And when you work with animals, the minute you tell somebody what your job is, everybody wants to know everything. There's no airplane ride or taxi cab ride where you will have a moment of solace because everybody has so many questions. And then whenever I say I work in classical education now, people look away. They don't want to talk. They get really scared. It's almost like you can see that they have every Charles Dickens character in their head, every evil one, every Mr. Murdstone in the classroom with all these little Pips and these little Olivers saying, "Oh, please, sir, I'm so sorry. Have I offended you?" Right? And that's not what it is. But it does give me pause because I've seen classrooms like that. I've seen classrooms where we fall into the temptation of really pushing for obedience because we have all of this content, we have all of this incredibly rich curriculum, and how are we ever going to get through it if everybody's not quiet and seated perfectly? It's a temptation. But it doesn't have to be like that. When we have strict obedience, what are we teaching the children? That's what we need to be thinking about. So I'm going to talk about the definitions that I'm using for order and obedience, so we're on the same page. Obedience is a behavior that requires submission or direct compliance. So this is, I say you're going to do something and you do it. No questions. Order is the rightful relationship or arrangement between things. Sometimes the rightful relationship is, I need you to do this right now, or sit in your seat. And they comply without asking. Not necessarily obedience. So we need to continue to ask ourselves, what is the end goal with students? Aristotle said that virtue is concerned with the regulation of feelings and action. If this is true, then our classroom behavioral management should be geared toward instilling a love of order in the students. So when they leave our classroom, they're able to discern what is orderly and what is good. They need to be ordered toward virtue and toward morality. So we need to teach our students how to have that regulation of their feelings. Now, it doesn't mean, as Mr. Terry said earlier, it doesn't mean obedience is necessarily bad in certain situations. There will be times when you need to tell the little boy who's running to go get the ball that went out into the street to stop. and he needs to listen without question. Or the little girl who has an incredibly large stick, and here in Texas we have those fire ant piles, right? And she's going in because she's going to do her science experiment, and you need to tell her to stop. And she needs to stop right then and there. You're going to have 16-year-olds with driver's licenses on your campus running 5 minutes behind, and they are going to need to slow down the minute you instruct them to slow down. You may have a campus threat, and that entire classroom of children will need to immediately obey the lockdown orders. That's the time for obedience. It's hard to fight, though. The first week can be really tempting, especially those first 2 days. Students are already preconditioned to come into the classroom and be obedient. By virtue of it being your classroom, your age, you're older than them, your schooling, your position, they already walk in and feel that power and equity. That's not the time to drive it home and prove it to them. That's the time to start instilling order in the classroom. Because we want the children to be seeking the good. We want children who have integrity. We want them to know what is good and be willing to participate in it, even if you are not watching them at that moment. These children need to be able to assume the responsibilities of being a good citizen in our republic when nobody's watching. So there are 3 essential things I'm going to cover: aesthetics, procedures, and repetition. I'm not going to work too long on aesthetics because Jennifer Richter has a presentation on that, and this is going to be geared specifically to order in the classroom whenever I talk about aesthetics. So now I have a picture of popcorn. Okay. We all know the smell of popcorn. Show of hands, how many of you love the smell of popcorn? Somebody's in the office, and they're cooking popcorn, and you're like, man, that smells good. That's a lot of hands. How many of you hate the smell of popcorn? Okay, not really any of you. I'm actually one who, if I don't know that it's popcorn and I smell it, I'm like, oh, man, don't like that so much. How many of you all are totally indifferent? Somebody starts popping popcorn in your classroom, and you're fine. That's way fewer hands. Popcorn I chose because it's an incredibly strong smell. It's very pungent. It's very distracting. Be sure when you are in your classroom, smells, sights, sounds, music that you play, be sure they're not distracting from your lesson. Because I can tell you right now, the minute I walk into a room, if it smells like popcorn, I am thinking about popcorn. And your children in your classrooms who do not have as much temperance as we hopefully have as adults are struggling with it even more. Here's another example. What is this aisle? Somebody can just call out. What is this aisle? It's a candy aisle. This is not just a candy aisle. There's other stuff up here. Where do you see this? It's the last minute buy in the checkout aisle. What are you trying to do whenever you walk to this aisle? What is your purpose? To check out. Your purpose is to check out. It is to get out of there. What happens when you see her in front of you? What do you think she's going to do? Put one more item in a basket. That's awesome, right? Those little hands, look at that colorful stuff. And it's right there at their eye level and right there at they don't even have to do much to touch it and grab it. It's not just meant for kids, right? This is exercising your temperance when you walk through this aisle. What kind of restraint do you have? Do you need batteries? Do you need some Febreze for your car? Look, Starbucks gift cards, you know you need that, right? It's really distracting. Those People magazines that are on the other side of this aisle, it can be incredibly distracting. It's more distracting for kids than it is adults, right? There aren't many adults that I see in this shopping aisle throwing a temper tantrum, screaming up and down, but I want another, I want another. But I do see that with the children. So we understand that that happens with children here. Why don't we understand that it happens here? You can find all sorts of pictures like this on Pinterest. It's distracting. It's distracting them away from you and away from what you're teaching. It's distracting their imagination from taking over. And somebody spent incredible money on this. Chances are their own money. To create, like, this is a reading garden. That's gorgeous. It was probably inspired by the secret garden. But I can tell you right now, the child who sits right next to that is going to be looking at that all day long instead of looking at you. I'm not just going to talk about grammar school. Look at this high school classroom. I don't know what those words are, but I want to read every single one. Somebody's written all sorts of interesting things, I'm sure, all over those walls. There are too many focal points. We see this in art, right? We go to an art gallery. When we look at great masterpieces of art, there are focal points. How many focal points are in this classroom? It's more than I would be able to take in. This allows me to breathe. It's going to allow your students to breathe. It's going to allow their imagination to be able to take over. It's not completely barren. This is actually Founders Leander. And they're engaged in a Socratic seminar. This is upper school. They're able to focus on each other. We have here, shout out to all of you in Arkansas. We have an Arkansas photo here that I stole from their Facebook. We also have Denton Classical here. This is lovely. This is a portable. And it can still be calm and lovely and have color, but gear the focus toward the teacher. It can still be orderly. We have Founders Frisco here. I think this is another Arkansas picture. So we can still have color. We can still have things that draw their eye momentarily, not completely take the focus away. And that's important. We want them to enjoy the classroom. We also don't want them to be overwhelmed. Your classroom should be calming. It should be a nice place for them to go to. And it should foster the ability for them to focus on you. So we're not removing all distractions. There's still going to be distractions. But we want it to be at the level which they can handle so they can master their temperance, which will free you up to be able to teach. I want to make a quick point about uniforms here, too. Nobody likes to police uniforms, right? But that's part of your aesthetic. That's part of the order. If you have people who are consistently failing to follow uniform policy, and you let that slide, what is the message you're sending to your students? Is it because they agree with you and you guys agree that this is unnecessary, that we're willing to not follow those procedures? And what happens the next time they decide that something is not necessary, but you think it is? Okay, so we covered a little bit of aesthetics. Now we're going to move on to procedures. Before we go to procedures, I wanted to talk a little bit about reinforcement and punishment, because these are two behavioral principles that we're always using in the classroom. I will say when you have solid procedures, it's going to lessen the need to be working with student discipline. But so we're working with the same definitions. Reinforcement is anything that makes a behavior continue. Punishment is something that will help to extinguish a behavior or lessen the frequency that it happens. So when you want something to continually occur, you reinforce it. When you would like something to stop, sometimes you choose not to reinforce it. Sometimes you will issue a punishment. Be very, very careful with those punishments. If it is not stopping the behavior, is it working? And if it's not working, what is the point of continuing to issue the same consequence over and over again? And I'm going to bring up a little story here. I had a teacher, when I was teaching, come to me and he said, "I don't know what to do. I was so frustrated." It was the end of the day, and he had given out 11 demerits. And for those of you who are new to Founders, demerits are a poor behavior notification. 11 to one student, one child, who was also in second grade. It was a 7-year-old child who had racked up 11 demerits. Is that behavior being stopped? It's not. So there's something we're not addressing. If you find yourself getting caught in that loop, stop and pause and think about what you can do to try and break that, okay? We'll get back to that story a little bit later. I want you to be careful with reinforcers. What is it you are reinforcing? If you are giving out no homework passes because a kid is doing a great job, what have you just communicated to the parents and the children about how you feel about homework? About the importance of what you're giving them to work on at home? It cannot be that important if they don't have to do it. We all love dress-down days. We all love them. If it is a reward for doing something, you are now rewarding somebody again for getting out of responsibility. Be careful with candy too, guys. There are lots of parents who don't like certain dyes. There are lots of parents who have children on no sugar diets, all sorts of different dietary restrictions in your classrooms. And what is it saying to the kiddo in the corner who can't have anything when you reinforce somebody else with candy? Okay, we've set up a conflict here, and they're going to feel that. Reinforcement can happen. That's something that I see in classical schools as, I don't want to tell them good job. They should be doing it. They should know what to do. No, they don't. They're here to learn. If they're doing what's expected, that's awesome because they are young and they will need lots of reminders to do what's expected. They'll need to know that it's good that they're doing the right thing. They will need to associate good feelings with good behavior. Reinforce it back into the classroom. Look at your handwriting here. Wow, look at that letter B you did right there on that sheet of paper. That's really well done. You've got consistent letter formation. I want to see that. Keep it up. Reinforce by giving pencils if you are a giver. You don't have to. But if you're one of the teachers who you know you are going to go out and you're going to hit that Dollar Tree and you were looking for something, of course, check with your headmaster first. But pencils are a great one. It's something that focuses them back into the classroom. Reward them with extra responsibility. You did a great job. How about help me hand out papers? We want them to enjoy taking on that responsibility. We want them to enjoy doing what is good. And we want them to enjoy helping to continue that order in the classroom and knowing that they can take part in that. So, why are we starting with procedures? We are starting with procedures because it's great to be able to know. I put this up here. This is a 12 or 13 course dinner. Everything's laid out here. So I want you all to imagine that you are now at a dinner with somebody who you're trying to impress. A supervisor, a politician, a new family member, and you are sat down to this. If you don't like fish, do you know which forks you're not going to be using? Because there are a couple here that are seafood specific only. If you're lactose intolerant, do you know which ones you're not going to touch? What if you only want water? Which one of those glasses is appropriate for just water? If you don't know, and there's wonderful conversation and happening at that dinner table, are you going to be present in that conversation? Or are you going to be looking at everybody else, trying to figure out, okay, I know I'm supposed to work from the outside in, but what's going on with all these ones on top? I'm trying to figure out what are they doing, and now I need to follow suit. You're going to be lost. You will be out of that conversation. We want to bring the students into the conversation. We don't want them consistently having to think about, what is my teacher going to do today? Well, homework was up on this side of the board today. Yesterday, they didn't put it up. The day before, it was over on that wall. We don't want them to be thinking about that. We want them to be thinking about the new information you're presenting. So those procedures provide consistency. So they're not worrying about this. There are some things that they're going to come in worrying about that you have no control over. They're going to come in with a new backpack, and it's red. And then they look in the corner, and their best friend has got a blue one. And it's really cool. And it's that one that you told your mom you really wanted, but your mom said it's too much money and it's not going to last and it's not built very well. And now you could just absolutely shriek because you are so upset because you had this really cool backpack and you are absolutely sure that that child in the corner who is your best friend, who may not be your best friend anymore because you're so uncool looking with that backpack, is going to see it. And so as you walk to your seat, you're going to be watching your friend to see, is my friend seeing that I have this backpack that's totally awful, and is my friend judging me? And the teacher is giving out instructions and you have no clue what's happening. There are going to be things that you cannot control that these children are coming into the classroom with. But the things you can control, the things that you can make predictable, do. It frees them up to be able to participate in what you are sharing with them, in educating them. So, clear and known expectations. This will prevent you from having to exercise a lot of behavioral management in the classroom. My best advice for this, because every single school is going to have slightly different procedures, lead with what to do. I have done this so many times where the students are coming into class and you're running a little bit late because it was like 5 minutes and you had a headmaster who made you meet right before school and you had to get these things copied and you're trying to get to your classroom and you know you're going to be like 30 seconds late and those kids are standing outside the door and you're like, okay, all right, everybody, get into the classroom, don't wander, get in, don't wander. I can do all sorts of things that are don't wander that I'm pretty sure the teacher doesn't want me to do. If all you tell me is don't wander, I can go hang out in the back of the room and chat with my friend. My feet are firmly planted on the ground. I can sit under my desk, not wandering. Most of the time when this happens, it's not ill-intentioned, right? They're having fun. All they know is they shouldn't wander. Oh, I see that the teacher has a blue expo marker today. I want to put my name on the board in blue. Right? And then you pop in, what are you doing on the board? I don't know, I was just not supposed to wander. Okay. Clear and direct instruction. Walk in the classroom quietly, take your seat. If you don't have those procedures, start thinking about them. How do you hand out papers? If you're in grammar school and you are walking papers to every single child, I promise you when you start with number 1, handing out that paper, and then you get to number 27, number 1 is already done. I can't tell you what they're going to do afterward, but I'm pretty sure you're going to have to talk to them about it. Okay? Have some helpers be able to help you. Get all the papers out. Everybody wait. Your paper's down. Wait. Wait. Turn it over. Then everybody's excited to start. Still have students finishing at different times. Think about what they can do afterward. Upper school, do your students know where everything is in the classroom? At this point, you really shouldn't have to be instructing them to wait. Sometimes they'll get a kick out of it. Even the old ones, they'll act like it's totally uncool, but they'll still do it. But they should be able to get a sheet of paper if they forgot their paper. They should know where it is and not have to disrupt the class about it. They should know the procedure to sharpen a pencil. I promise you, your middle schoolers, that pencil sharpener is loud. Even if you give them a time to sharpen a pencil, they are mortified to go up to sharpen their pencil. Well, it's one of two things. They're either mortified because it makes so much noise and then all eyes are on them, or they're like, yeah, I'm totally going to disrupt class, right? Have a procedure for it. Then there's no question, and it doesn't disrupt class. How to take notes, how to fill out your planners. Even through high school, they need to remember where to put their name in their notes, where to put the date on that page. I've seen middle schoolers who need to be reminded, turn to the next page that's empty in your notebook. Don't just open it up to the middle, because then they'll never find their notes again. Do your students know in upper school seminar days versus lecture days? Can they move their desks quickly without taking 15 minutes of the class away? Practice it. Do your students know how to silently ask for assistance? Best procedure for somebody who's shy and would never ask for assistance otherwise is to give them a way to let you know they need help. Can they get up and get a tissue? Do they know a procedure that you can just nod at them to get a tissue instead of interrupting what you're saying at the moment? Do they have a procedure for going to the restroom instead of having to call out, and they're waiting, and you are on this excellent point, you're right at the crux, but then they start getting really urgent? Yes, I have to go to the restroom. Do they have a way to show you so you can just nod at them and they can leave the classroom? For emergencies, do you know who has left your classroom? If you have 2 students at the nurse, one student whose lunch is up front because they forgot their lunch at home, and another student in the restroom, and a police officer walks into your classroom, do you know who's missing out of your classroom and where they are at that given moment in time? Or at least where they should be? Yes, I have this one at the nurse. I have this one who should be coming back from the nurse right now. I have this one who's going to get their lunch, and this one's in the restroom. If you don't know, think about a procedure for it. So first day, you're going to be heavy on procedures. You're back to school. I actually adapted this, so if you were with me yesterday, I had a really good question. What do we do with procedures that first day? You will be heavy on procedures. They need to know what's happening in your classroom. They also need to know that it's a place of instruction. Teach the first day. Make sure they are getting the curriculum on the very first day. Is it going to be what it's like 4 weeks in? No. But they do need to know that this is a place of learning. Be careful about the getting to know you games. Some of us loved them as a kid. Do you know who loved them? The ones who had awesome things to share. That's who loves them. Be cognizant of the fact that you will have children in your classroom who have been home all summer because they are in a single-parent household and they are taking care of their younger sibling and they are making meals. And they have to go up after somebody who has just said they went on a road trip to the Grand Canyon and then they drove to Florida and then they got to go to Hawaiian Falls a bunch of times. Be careful when getting away from the curriculum. Okay, what are you rewarding at that point? You are rewarding somebody for speaking well, and you're also ending up accidentally punishing a child who has no control over what they did that summer, who had to take responsibilities well beyond their age that they should be rewarded for. But I promise when they say it, they're not going to feel that they were rewarded. Okay? So be careful keeping that line between teacher and student. All right, next one is repetition. So we've talked about aesthetics, procedure, now we're on to repetition. This is really cool, guys. This is a parabolic mirror. It's a type of crucible. Anybody know what they're doing here? They're not melting. It's not a melting crucible, but excellent thought. It's happening right now in Tokyo. The Olympics. This is an Olympic torch. They still light it this way. This is a parabola. This is a There's a story about Archimedes working the parabolas. Now, how true the story is, not sure. But what this does is it focuses all the light into one point to ignite that flame. No matches, no lighter. Okay, there are a lot of different ways to do things. Some of them require a lot of repetition. Okay? So with repetition, we're a classical school. We get it. We get it with poetry. We have some students who can recite. Wow, I remember we had one student who got to, I believe it was line 261 of the Iliad one year. Wow, it's insane. Now, not to book two, I don't know who could remember the catalog of the ships. That would just be painful. But they're used to memorizing. We forget that we need repetition of procedures sometimes. And we forget that we will have to repeat ourselves. So I'm going to go back to the story about the second grade teacher who was so frustrated with his 7-year-old that he gave him 11 demerits. I said, what in the world did this kiddo do to deserve 11 demerits? And he said, oh, he just won't stop talking. I have to keep on telling him over and over. And I finally said to him, how many times do I have to tell you this? How many times do I have to tell you this? That's that phrase that's ingrained in our memory, right? Parents have said it out of frustration. Teachers have said it to us out of frustration. We hated it when we heard it. It doesn't do anything helpful, does it? My answer to the teacher was, well, let me ask you, how does your house look right now? Is all of your laundry in the hamper? Not outside the hamper on the floor. Is it actually in the hamper where it should be? What about your cup of coffee from this morning? Is it in the sink? Now, he was silent and he turned red. And I said, how many times did your mama tell you to put your laundry in the hamper and not leave dishes in the sink before you leave the house? How many times? And now you're out of the house. And how many times did she remind you? So my answer is, you are going to have to remind these children a ton of times. Some children, you will have to remind every class period. Some children, it'll last for a day. Some children, it'll last for a week, that reminder. They're all growing, and they're all growing at different paces. And it does take that reminder. Your choice then becomes, do I get frustrated? Do I allow myself to be frustrated that I need to continue to give these reminders? Or do I just recognize that this is part and parcel of the job? We're teaching. They're going to need to be reminded. So it is necessary to repeat. You need to set the tone on that. So we've talked about reminders, repetition, practice those procedures. They will forget after Thanksgiving break. They will need a reminder. There are some classes that come back after winter break, and I don't know what happens to them. It's like they age 2 years, and all of a sudden you're like, wow, this is glorious. They remember everything. And then it hits into February, and they're a mess. Right? So I want to say, as an administrator, that's one of the times when I can tell if you're being very heavy-handed with obedience versus order. Is at those times when they start to fall apart. Okay? all of the students will get squiggly at certain times of the year. All of them. And there will be some times when you have to do a lot more reminders. You have to gather them together more. But if they can't be reminded even for short bits of time, and I have a teacher come to me and say, I don't know what to do, I can't control them. I can't control them. That's part of the problem. They need to be motivated to control themselves. They need to be helped with it. They don't have the temperance. Help them by not providing a ton of distraction. Help them by letting them know what they need to do. Help them by friendly reminders. Know that sometimes of the year, they'll require more reminders. If they don't have all of that built up, then you are resorting to just obedience, of just follow because I say, I need you to follow this right now. And they're going to be tired. It's not going to be a habit. It's going to be a lot more work than they're ready to do because they haven't built up those good habits. Now, all of this really hinges on one thing. Because I can say we need order in the classroom. We need to avoid obedience unless it's to do with a safety issue or something that's very, very important, right? As Mr. Terry pointed out earlier, obedience within religions, yes, that's necessary. Many different religions require that. You are not their religious authority. Parents will require obedience. You are not their parents, right? So sometimes we need obedience in the classroom. We want to foster order because we want the students taking the responsibility for themselves. We want the students loving the order, enjoying it, realizing that when they fall into place and they don't have to think about what to do, that it's enjoyable to learn. It all hinges, though, on you. You have got to set the tone. If your desk looks like this, you are not setting the tone. If you're the teacher who is consistently letting your children out 3 to 4 minutes late every single class period, what are you teaching them? If you're forgetting to return papers, if you're consistently late in getting grades in, what are you teaching them about your deadline whenever their papers are due? Make sure you are modeling that. There will be times when you have a rough day, but it shouldn't be a regular thing. We need to be modeling that order. We need to be modeling that temperance that we're expecting of the children. So, to our mission, as Mr. Terry pointed out earlier, prosperous lives in a free society. That's incredibly important. I have teachers say, how do you know when you've gotten it right? So you're telling me all these things that you see my students do that's letting you know that I've been too heavy-handed. How do I know when I've gotten it right? One of the telltale indicators for me is when I give a tour. If I am taking parents around a grammar school and I see the students walking through the grammar school and they have to pass by us and all of a sudden they walk like this. And they get a little taller and they get a little straighter and their teeth, like they have more teeth than you can possibly imagine showing because they're excited to do well. They are so excited to show all of these adults on tour that they know how to walk in the hallway. If I see them do this, I gotta do this again. They're not feeling good about behaving well. Tells me that they've been too heavy-handed. I want to see the students joyfully showing. And sometimes you see them, they see the tour and they're like, oh, my shirt! And they start feeling around, is my shirt? And then they get back to it and they're so excited and they're looking at the tour. In upper school, it's seeing that engagement. And Mr. Terry spoke about that. When they feel good for doing good things, and they see that somebody is watching, sometimes you see them step it up a little bit more, right? All of a sudden, they're very engaged. All of a sudden, they remember all of their Latin, and you're like, wait a minute, what? You knew this the whole time? They're excited to participate. They're excited to ask interesting questions. They're even excited to do recitations. And it may be a bad day for that class. I apologize whenever I walk through and they use up all the good behavior that they had stored in their body for that day because they had a rough morning before they came in, and then they see the tour and they're like, yes, I can get this 2 minutes. And then we leave and they go, oh, right? But they were excited to show that they know what to do. Invariably, all of the parents will ask me, I don't know if my kid can come here. I don't think they can do that. Are the kids like this all the time? No, they are not. I'm looking at that grammar school line, and I see that little one in the back, and I'm like, oh, man, you are awesome, because I know if it were any other time, you would be trying to run up and down that hallway so fast. Or you would walk behind and be like, I'm not touching you, right? Or the high school student who's slumping in their chair most of the time, showing off the minute a tour comes. That's okay. They're feeling good about showing that they're capable and responsible. They're going to have off days just like us. What I want to know is that they're associating participation in the good and love of being a responsible individual as a good thing. I want to know that they're pairing that together. I want to know that when we say responsibility or we say participation in what is good, that they're actually excited about it. Because somebody's not always going to be watching. So they're going to need to know how to make that decision themselves. And sometimes the wrong people will be watching. There may be people who require obedience, but it isn't something that a child or a teenager should do. And they need to know and have been exposed to the idea that they can participate in what is rightfully ordered and know when obedience is okay and when it's not. They need to learn that. So we do need to allow them to be given some of the power to make those decisions. And we want to foster ways to help them do it. It's going to be tough to make the right decision if within reach your classroom looks like the candy aisle. That's going to put a lot of mental task on your students. It's going to be tough to make that right decision. We want them to practice good habits, practice making the right decision. So that way, we know when they leave us that they're prepared to make the right decisions. Okay, any questions? And I'm going to remind you that the microphones are on the side, and I'll probably step away from the microphone to try to hear you because of the difficulties of speaking into the microphone and being able to hear. I'll use the teach like a champion. What questions are there? What questions do you have?
So, hi, understand where you're coming from in the get to know you portion of it. And I teach art and music, so I see all of the kids. And I understand where you're coming from, but I'm wanting to know some guidance for ways to get to know my students. I get, and I'm sensitive to that fact that my kids got to go to Wyoming for 5 weeks where another student is sitting at home. But I do really want to take time in my very little amount of time to get to know them. So do you have some guidelines or some tips to help get to know my students?
That's an excellent question, and by the way, your art, music, and PE teachers will know which are the well-ordered classrooms and which are not because they see them all the time. So if you ever wonder, go ask them as well. I would suggest for art, they could either write and turn it into you or draw a picture about it and caption it. And then that way it's private, but then you could also share it later. So that way they have the opportunity to share with you, but it doesn't end up being an inadvertent competition with who did what. And then you can also see their baseline of how they write. Are you getting complete sentences? I saw somebody else. Hello. You could, but then the virtual people wouldn't be able to hear.
Can't forget them. Okay, so I was wondering, you were talking about not repetition. What was the other R word? When you're correct. No, the other one. When you're correcting behavior. Reminding. Sorry. So you're talking about reminding and reminding and reminding and reminding again, and I'm with upper school, with high school, and I was wondering if you had any advice about striking the balance between going overboard with reminding and setting a hard, like, no, you have to be punished. Because you can, if you keep reminding, I fear that you become the pushover, like they know there's no actual consequence.
That's an excellent question. Some of it's going to have to do with knowing your students if they have any 504 plans or IEPs. Some of it may come with contacting parents, not necessarily as a punishment, but an inquiry. Hey, I've noticed that this child's been requiring a lot more reminders than I'm used to giving them. Is there something else happening that I need to be aware of? If not, let me know what works at home. That's one of my favorites whenever I'm experiencing any discipline issues in the classroom, is reaching out to the parent and saying, what are you doing at home that seems to work? Because they usually have quite a few ideas. If you sense that it's disobedience, then yes, there's definitely the time to start elevating the consequences. And so that is tough because now you're having to try and discern intentionality, and especially when you're in upper school, you're seeing a lot of students. So definitely contact your teachers too.
Yeah,
so is this...
are a little more savvy.
Yes, they are. Is this happening in your class too, or do they just not like English? Right? That'll also give a window into what they're capable of. Is it always happening after lunch? Is it always... So there are a lot of factors to try and discern that. And that does end up being the wisdom on your side, and also working with your team to try and put that student on alert. So one thing that usually helped is if you guys are doing regular team meetings where you bring up, hey, I've noticed that this student in particular has kind of started doing this. Is this happening to anybody else? And that'll let you know if they're really trying to push it with you or if there's something that's happening across the board.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Hi, Ms. Rocha.
Hello. I just want to know what your thoughts are with color charts, and dealing with the students that may seem a little more challenging behaviorally. Do you, as founders, is it something that we keep privately? Is it something that should be posted? Because some students, they may need constant reminders over time, and the only way for them to finally realize what they should be doing is when it is shown in front of the class. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Work with anybody in 504 in special education first, right? That's an excellent question about color charts, and this is one I'm going to tell you guys that this is near and dear to my heart because I will tell you, I was the child that if you put me on red and other people saw that, I would be like, let me show you how red this day can get. Okay? So be careful. They're in your classrooms too. Be careful. Sometimes it is going to depend on your class, and sometimes it'll depend on the student. Because the point of the color chart is to help give them a visual for how to manage their behavior, right? And it is tough. There are some who that peer pressure starts early, right? And they start to go down, and you see them. I would say if they go down on that level before they hit rock bottom and you start see what kind of change happens. They may need personal reminders. It may be okay to be up front. I wouldn't go past it past second grade using a color chart unless they have it in their IEP or IAP. But always, I think with color charts, the most important thing to remember is that they need to be able to go back up. They need to be able to redeem themselves by showing good behavior, because then they can recognize that what they're doing does have an effect. Does that help answer? Yes? Okay.
Hi.
We have another art teacher, which means she knows what everybody's class is like.
So I do teach art, and I have 4 different classes that are working on different curriculums, and they each need examples. So having pictorial examples of what we're studying in history, and then what their project is that goes with it. I'm gonna need a little help on what's too much on the walls and what's okay on the walls. I don't have it up front. I have it like on the sides. So when I'm teaching, if their eyes are there, then I know they're not. So how do you balance that?
That's a great question. Feel it out with your class. Chat with your administrator. I'm happy to come to your room if you need. I actually, as a teacher, I had artwork on almost every single wall. It becomes overbearing if it is, I hate to do this because so many people like to go, if it's like Vegas in your classroom, you're overboard, right? We want to make sure that things are interesting, but also redirecting back to the curriculum. So as you said, the things that you have on the walls are relevant to what they're studying at the moment. That's great. Examples are great. We want to make sure that the things that are on the wall that are relevant to the moment don't die there until summer, right? But at the same time, don't feel the pressure to be remaking a bulletin board constantly just for the sake of having a bulletin board and having color in the classroom, right? It's important to be able to show some work, but if you have everybody's work up there and little Johnny did nothing but a scribble, right? He's not necessarily going to feel good about it when he sees it. And we may not be setting up that ideal of beauty. Does that answer?
Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? I see Ambrosia back there. It's 11:15 is when we go till, yes? Okay. So I think we have a couple minutes. Okay, I'll just throw one out there, because I brought up reinforcements. Bribes. Be careful not to bribe your students. Okay? Reinforcement is something that you give because they're doing a good job. Bribing occurs after a student does something that they're not supposed to. And then you are basically begging them to behave. That is not the right order of things. It doesn't work. And it doesn't really teach the student something that's soul ennobling, right? We don't want them to dig their feet in deeper the next time. It's like the child in the candy aisle. That's basically where you see a perfect example of a bribe occur, right? Mom, I want this. Mom, I want this. Mom, I want this. Dad, what about that? Dad, what about that? If I get them this one, then they'll be quiet. Right? There's misbehavior. They didn't listen to you say no to the first time, so they keep on asking. They keep on asking. They keep on asking. And then you give in because you need them to be quiet at that moment. But the next time you hit that aisle, they're going to be louder after you say no. And they're going to be more persistent because it worked last time. So I know it's going to work this time. Maybe I just need to push a little harder. That is really, really difficult behavior to extinguish if you get it started. That is really tough. And you may find yourself falling into that sometimes. Start a hard reset in the classroom. If you find you've done that in the classroom, take advantage of a 3-day weekend. Take advantage of a long break. If you don't have a long break or a 3-day weekend, be flat out honest with your students. We're on a path that's not working for this classroom. This is how we're going to start it now. Because we're human, we're going to make those mistakes. I have made tons of them in the classroom. Your administrators have all made tons of those mistakes in the classroom. If you have a team lead structure, your team leads have all made those mistakes. Reach out to your fellow teachers, reach out to your administrators, reach out to your team leads. We have all been there. And sometimes just the advice will be able to help. All right, I will let you all go ahead and go. Thank you for joining. I'll be up here. If you have any questions, you can come ask me. I love the music.